A new year brings changes to Medicare, what it means for patients and their doctors.
I think more people will be receptive to palliative care, but I think also in turn more people will end up being more receptive to hospice care as well, because they'll have a better understanding of what it actually is.
Plus, Arizona lawmakers go back to the Capitol. A look back at 2015 and what's in store for the new year.
We're going to shrink government, we're going to right-size government, we're going to make it more efficient.
Plus, what to expect in the governor's State of the State. This is Arizona Week. Hello and thanks for joining us. It's estimated nearly 2 million Medicare-eligible people will die this year. On January 1st, Medicare added additional coverage for end-of-life planning and care for Americans 65 and older. One policy change will allow physicians additional opportunities to discuss end-of-life planning with their patients. A look now at how these changes are important to doctors and patients in Arizona.
How are you today?
Pretty good. Things have been going pretty well for me. I'm very satisfied with my life right now. Sometimes I'd like to be able to travel. I don't know if that's ever going to be possible again, but I don't have really much to complain about.
Medicare has previously paid for patients to have an end-of-life planning conversation with their doctor just once. This occurred during their initial Welcome to Medicare conversation, when end-of-life issues are the last thing on a new enrollee's mind. These talks can be very difficult, but should ideally lead to the completion of state-mandated forms called end-of-life directives. These describe the patient's wishes regarding their own death and dictate a wide range of actions, from total and aggressive medical interventions to do not resuscitate or DNR orders. All directives should also designate a medical power of attorney. Beginning this year, Medicare will now pay for patients and doctors to have more of these sensitive and lengthy conversations.
From what we know of physicians and the other practitioners, like nurse practitioners and so forth, that would take advantage of this benefit, they're very busy people, and this is not something that you can jam into a couple minutes in the hallway. You have to take some time and think about it. So I think the fact that it can be reimbursed is a little bit more desirable if you're going to plan to set aside, 30 minutes or 60 minutes with one patient that's going to take a big piece out of your day. It just seems a natural thing.
David Sayan is the Medicare Regional Administrator for District 9. Headquartered in San Francisco, California, District 9 includes California, Nevada, Hawaii, and Arizona.
If we don't know what the patient wants to do at the time that we have to make a decision and she's not able to tell us, how could it be patient-centered care? So I think it's about families and patients and about physicians being more comfortable not having to guess or decide for themselves, how to make decisions about what treatments to give people.
The way reimbursement is now, it's more based on quantity, the number of patients you see, how quickly you see them. But there's been a real shift in medicine more towards value-based care. Does the care you provide actually provide quality care? And is it cost-effective care as well? And I think this is in line with that. I think to reimburse physicians to actually sit down and spend the time with patients, they'll be more likely to have them. And I think most physicians want to have these conversations.
Dr. Gobi Paramanandam is with the Hospice of the Valley in Phoenix.
If that conversation's not had, it's often automatically assumed that a patient would want everything. And as a medical system, that's the way we're designed. If a patient comes in, we'll continue to treat and we'll continue to aggressively treat until someone says to stop that treatment. If it's not in writing, it's very difficult. So if there's a situation where a patient is unable to communicate, then it goes to it goes to a surrogate. Or ideally you have a medical power of attorney. But if you don't have paperwork, right, then it falls to your family members. And that's a difficult place to put a family member. There can be a lot of guilt surrounding those decisions, especially if a conversation hasn't been had prior into what your wishes are.
That's what I'm afraid of, the whole hospital, rehab, all that stuff. I don't want to be a major distraction in negative sense to my daughter.
But having these conversations early allows people to be able to make more informed decisions when they get into the hospital, when some of these issues may occur. And for some patients, actually, we've prevented that last hospitalization. And I know we've discussed in the past some of these conditions. Unfortunately, there's not a cure. They're not going to go away. They're treatable, definitely, but not curable. Knowing that, what are your goals? What are your hopes? What are your fears?
Well, I'm not afraid of much at this point.
Have you thought about what you would want if the disease did progress?
I would want to go into hospice.
Nearly half of all Medicare beneficiaries die while enrolled in hospice. That's twice the number of just 15 years ago. Most often, hospice care is provided at home and accounts for 10% of the Medicare money spent during a patient's last year of life. There are approximately 90 hospice providers in Arizona.
Hospice is specialized care for patients with a terminal diagnosis. So for a patient to get the benefits of hospice, two physicians need to state that a patient, in their best estimation, has 6 months or less to live. The goal is to focus on improving or maintaining a patient's quality of life and allowing them to live well in the days or months that they have left. With hospice care, a patient does need to give up aggressive care to receive hospice care.
For people who have a terminal illness, there is a Medicare benefit called a hospice benefit that provides things that Medicare wouldn't normally cover. That is a valuable service. We don't think enough people take advantage of it. Many people only do it at the very end of their life because they view it as sort of throwing in the towel, if you will, because the way the law is constructed, when you opt to receive those benefits, you're no longer getting the other Medicare benefits like chemotherapy, like radiation that might be trying to save your life.
Although they use different terms, another Medicare benefit is the practice of palliative care or comfort care.
Does it go up the calf or just up the side?
No, it goes up right here.
So palliative care is not necessarily geared towards curing the disease. It's more of a supportive care. So similar to hospice, palliative care can address the physical, emotional, and social needs of a terminal diagnosis or a serious illness. The most important distinction with palliative care is that you can continue with aggressive treatments while you get palliative care. So for example, that end-stage cancer patient can continue with chemotherapy and radiation and get concurrent palliative care. End-stage kidney disease patient can continue dialysis and still get palliative care. They're not mutually exclusive. Palliative care is not always hospice care, but hospice care is always palliative care.
Medicare does pay for palliative care during hospice. However, the inability of Medicare to pay for curative or aggressive care in conjunction with hospice care has led to another change beginning in 2016. A multi-year study is now underway at over 140 hospices nationwide, looking at the possibility of providing both kinds of care to beneficiaries.
This program, the Medicare Care Choices model, will allow people who have been diagnosed with a terminal disease to continue curative treatment for their disease and at the same time access some of the palliative care benefits of the Medicare hospice benefit, like social work counseling, like counseling for the family, like some dietary work, perhaps some help in the home, at the same time where normally a person would cease the curative treatment and go into the hospice program. So, I mean, what we believe is, or we'd like to determine is, giving this fuller, richer sets of benefits will result in a better patient-centered experience for the patient, family, caregivers, and we're very excited about it.
Hi, don't you look cute? Hi! Oh, look at Quinn.
The Care Choices model allows for a patient to have both, to continue with their aggressive care, their curative care, but to at the same time have concurrent palliative care. So there are certain criteria. So a patient at this time would have to qualify for hospice. So again, a patient that would have potentially, again, in the best estimation of their physicians, 6 months or less to live. So if they were hospice appropriate, but still seeking aggressive care, they would qualify for this program. They would also have to have 2 hospitalizations related to their terminal diagnosis to qualify for the program, as well as 3 visits with a physician treating that diagnosis as well. So Hospice Valley was the only hospice in Arizona actually selected for the Care Choices program. We've had a palliative care program in one way or another for almost 15 years.
I don't know if I can hear over this jacket or not, but we'll try it. Oh, speaking of that, how's the blood pressure's been?
Gwen Sargent would qualify for the Medicare Care Choices model to receive curative care while in hospice. She's currently under the care of her older twin sisters.
She has non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, mantle cell, and so they have helped us, the palliative care have helped us evaluate and know that what we're doing is going along all right. She was in a group home, and so once she became ill, we moved her out of there, and then we move her between our 2 houses as our schedule works for us, depending on what's happening. So usually she spends 2 weeks at one house and 2 at another, and so far she's been very happy with moving in between the houses.
And I really didn't know specifically the difference between palliative care and hospice care. In fact, that was one of my first questions. The first time they came was, if we choose palliative care, can she still continue to be treated? I wanted to know that because if they wouldn't, we weren't ready for that. That she could continue on medication, that they would treat the situation that was occurring. And it was to be our choice. And we wanted to continue. We wanted to try this new medication.
Knowing that they have an option, they don't have to choose one or another. I think they'll be more open to palliative care. I also think in the long run they'll be more open to hospice care, because I think many people think hospice care is a place where you go and you die, where actually hospice is a philosophy of care for patients, and majority of the patients end up at home. They die in home. So I think more people will be receptive to palliative care, but I think also in turn more people will end up being more receptive to hospice care as well, because they'll have a better understanding of what it actually is.
Some of the Medicare Care Choices study sites will start to receive reimbursement from Medicare in 2016. The others, including Hospice of the Valley, won't get reimbursements until 2018, but they have already begun providing dual care.
We are the largest not-for-profit hospice in Arizona, so we were able to even fund this when Medicare wasn't paying for this, able to fund this with donation dollars. Recently, we've had some relationships with Medicare Advantage plans that are paying for this.
Private insurance companies can offer a Medicare Advantage plan. This kind of plan contracts with Medicare to provide a patient's total Medicare benefits through their company. Even before the 2016 Medicare Care Choices project, Cigna partnered with Hospice of the Valley to study the feasibility of offering these dual benefits.
We at Cigna Medical Group established a pilot project for palliative care about 2 years ago. Again, we identified that there were a lot of patients who seemed to have a need for additional levels of service to address their serious and chronic medical conditions that we couldn't meet necessarily in the clinic or through the hospital. And we really wanted to try to develop a continuum of care for those patients that included a home-based project or a home-based level of care. Being in the palliative care program does not exclude curative treatments or treatments that include hospitalization, for example. It doesn't obligate a patient to disengage from their primary physician or from their specialist. They can access all of those services while at the same time receiving comfort care in their home. It is a standard practice for the medical group now. We actually moved from our pilot program within a couple of months because it was simply so successful. We had such a really overwhelmingly positive response, not only from the patients, but from the clinicians who referred them.
Hello. Oh, look at that hat.
The Medicare Care Choices study will take several years to determine the costs, the benefits, and the feasibility of providing palliative and curative care simultaneously. However, some patients who would be eligible for the program, like Pamela Barnes, are already receiving this type of care and feel it is making a difference.
So when I was diagnosed with cancer about the time that my husband died, they were the first people that I called, because I knew it was a matter of time that I was going to need to have somebody there for me on a regular basis. I had pancreatic cancer, so if I didn't take chemo, I would probably only live about 6 months. So right now, with 2 little great-grandchildren, I would like to live longer than that, but God only knows. I hate to rely on people. So at some point, I will have to. So
yeah, as much as you can do it yourself. We look at the whole person, not just the cancer or the heart disease or whatever it is. And I think, we look at their mental state, we look at their emotional state. We try to solve problems that other people don't even consider. I think it's the wave of the future, and we're all about prevention. So it's going to save, obviously, in the long run, the taxpayers, if we can keep people out of the hospital, keep them out of the emergency rooms. So I can only hope that Medicare will see the benefit in it. It's definitely a big service to people when they need it.
The Medicare Care Choices model, I think, is really important. It shows that Medicare cares about this type of care, and I'm hoping for good things from here.
That report was narrated by Gisela Tellis and produced by Tom Klesby. Arizona Public Media's hour-long documentary on end-of-life issues, Passing On, premieres February 22nd at 9 p.m. on PBS 6. The buzz now in much different news. The Arizona legislature begins its 2016 regular session Monday, and that's when Governor Doug Ducey delivers his State of the State address. For an analysis on all of this, I'm joined by Christopher Conover here at Arizona Public Media and Howard Fisher from Capital Media Services. He joins us from Phoenix. Howard, we'll start with you. What would you say was the big story of 2015?
Well, the story was we went from a $1 billion deficit to ending the fiscal year with about 290 to 325 million in the bank. And so that leads to the big story of 2016, which is, what do we do with the extra money?
So this was not very easy. Not everyone agreed with it. Christopher, we know that some people feel like it's not the best decision, i.e. the state treasurer has some concerns with where we get this money and how it looks coming up after the May special election.
Exactly. You're talking about Prop 123 or 123, depending on how you want to count that, where the governor proposed and the legislature passed that we'll take more money out of the state land trust to give to education over 10 years. State Treasurer Jeff DeWitt says this is bad fiscal policy. We're kind of robbing the future, I believe is the phrase he's used. It is actually up to the voters in the end. We're having a special election in May. We have to change the Constitution to do this. If it doesn't happen, that's going to put a lot of people in a very difficult situation, because part of this money goes for settling a lawsuit from schools that said they were shorted by the legislature, and the courts agreed on money.
So changing the state constitution, Howard, we've heard that that's good, or it's bad, or is it just, what are people saying at this point?
Well, there's a certain amount of skepticism. I mean, on one hand, everyone's glad that this lawsuit gets settled. Now, it's getting settled for about 67 cents on the dollar in terms of what the schools say they're owed. Remember, this goes back to 2000, when voters told the legislature, you will increase state aid to account for inflation every year. Well, back in 2009, they said, well, maybe they didn't really mean that. And obviously, the Supreme Court said, yes, they did, and we're still arguing over the amount owed. But the question becomes, what are the implications of amending the Constitution? I think a lot of the concern has to do with the triggers in there. For example, it says, while we're going to get $3.5 billion over the next 10 years in additional money, most of it from that trust that Christopher mentioned, there's also the question of, after that, there's a lid on it. In other words, when state school spending hits 49% of total state spending, they don't have to spend any more on education. And that leads to questions of, can you game the system? In other words, can you take certain things off the budget to keep education funding down? And that's a big fear going down the road.
So May, we'll have a special election. We'll learn more about this then. Christopher, all indications that this will go through, or will there be some last-ditch effort?
There is a group that is an official group working against it. Jeff DeWitt, the current treasurer, is very much against it. Dean Martin, who preceded the governor as treasurer, is also against it. They've been very vocal about it, but there's a group lobbying for it. They raised nearly $2 million, according to their own reporting, before the end of the year to push this forward. We're going to see a lot of TV ads probably about this. The Chamber of Commerce is behind it. So there's a lot of groundswell behind this. We just have to see if the former treasurers, not including the current governor's arguments, resonate with people. And as Howie mentioned, some of those triggers, like that 49% trigger, that may resonate with people also, a real fear that maybe we need to give more than half the state budget potentially to education, depending on what the times are. So there are a lot of arguments that still have to be dealt with.
And Howard, this was the big story for 2015 at the very end there. Will it be the big story for 2016?
Well, depending on whether the legislature is still around. I mean, obviously, whatever happens will be important. But here's where it gets really interesting. If, in fact, you decide to use the trust money to fund the school settlement, that still leaves a lot of money around to decide, what do you want to do with it? Now, I've talked to the governor, and he said that he's committed to doing, quote-unquote, tax reform, another word for tax cuts, which is going to anger some folks to say, wait a second, why are we taking money out of an education trust account to give it away instead to business and special interests? There's the question of other needs. Everyone admits, including the governor, that this $3.5 billion doesn't solve all of the education problems. Remember, it comes down to about $300 per year per child. And given how far we've fallen in education rankings, that may not be enough. Then there's a question of other needs. Department of Public Safety, the governor wants a border task force on that. You've got the Department of Corrections and whether we need more prisons. You have the whole issue of Department of Child Safety and the fact that they still have a backlog of 15,000 cases that have gone uninvestigated and untouched for more than 60 days. So there's going to be a lot of demands on that money, and that's going to be the big story. How does that money get divided up?
Let's go to that border strike force. That sort of made its way in toward the very end of the year there. But how far does this go this upcoming year? As you said, is the money really there for that now?
Well, the governor insists that he can do some of it by moving things around within DPS and that some of it needs new money. Now, here's where it gets interesting. To the extent you're moving things around in DPS, you're in a situation where perhaps, let's say we'll take some folks off the road on Highway 90 down in Sierra Vista or on I-19. And so you can only have so many dollars to spread around. And I think that's the concern. Several of the border sheriffs have told me, look, if he's got extra money for the border, give it to us. We're there. We know how to spend it.
And Christopher, we've heard talk that maybe DPS should be better served maybe working the crime lab or doing other things. Why not leave the feds, there are 4,000 Border Patrol agents in southern Arizona, why not leave the border to them?
It's the old argument that we've heard now for a couple of governors that the Fed's just not getting the job done. So the state is going to help them, if you will, and try and get the job done. As we've reported, and as Howard mentioned, some of the border sheriffs, Sheriff Estrada, not a big fan of this. He says in his county, after 2 a.m., there are no DPS officers on the road now. Why not give him the money, let him handle the border? He knows the border. He's a lifelong resident of that area. His officers, his deputies know the border, and let's put some more DPS officers on the road to do what DPS does. Don't give them additional assignments. And we've heard this from a number of border sheriffs, not all of them, but a number of them have had similar comments.
And Howard, we hear from the border sheriffs, but we haven't heard from some other sheriffs, maybe Sheriff Paul Babiou in Pinal County, Sheriff Joe Arpaio up in Maricopa County. We've not heard it all from the Tohono O'odham Nation, which is a big area for the border.
And that's going to be interesting because you've got some other dynamics at work there. Obviously, Sheriff Joe, who says he's the toughest sheriff this side of Orion, is a guy who can suck the air out of every room and can decide, how he wants to set the agenda. Now, Paul Babiou is running for Congress, and he's going to do a little bit of this to see which way the wind's blowing on it. But he's made it very clear he thinks there's more resources needed for the border. Is this the way of doing it? Of course, he's technically not a border sheriff, and if he's not going to get any resource, he may say, well, let's give it to DPS.
All right, let's move along. This week, President Obama issues an executive order regarding guns. Here we are on the 5th anniversary of the tragedy in Tucson. Howard, where does this ban on guns really stand here in Arizona?
Well, the fact is that it's all going to come down to federal issues. The Arizona legislature has made it clear they don't want any restrictions on guns. In fact, you'll remember they actually have passed laws specifically aimed at the city of Tucson. Remember, Tucson tried to say we ought to do background checks at gun shows, and the legislature said, no, you can't. The city tried to talk about public buildings. Now, that's still an open debate as to whether people should be able to bring their weapons into public buildings if there aren't metal detectors and such there. But this is going to play out at the national level. Now, of course, to a certain extent, what the president announced was not quite the executive edict that some folks said. It simply says, if you sell a certain number of guns, and he's never said an amount, we're going to consider you a dealer, and therefore, no matter where you sell, you have to do background checks. And that may require certainly legislation in Congress, including finding more ATF people to do those background checks.
Christopher, you had a conversation today about this.
I did. I spoke with Ken Rainier, the executive director of Gun Owners of Arizona, and overall, he said what the president did just talks about current law. And he had a very similar question to what Howard just raised about the additional ATF agents, because the president doesn't have the budgetary power to bring in more agents. That has to go through Congress. Congress has been very clear this week, or at least the Republican members of Congress have been very clear this week. They don't like what the president is doing, so getting more agents could be a real problem for him.
Okay, Howard, we've just got a few seconds left. What will we hear from the governor on Monday in his State of the State?
Well, we'll hear from him about, aren't I great? I did some wonderful things for the state over the last year. B, there's going to be more of the same coming. C, we're going to shrink government. We're going to right-size government. We're going to make it more efficient. D, there will be tax cuts. And E, I think you'll see a little surprise in there in the area of criminal justice reform.
Okay, Howard Fisher, always telling it like it is. Thank you for your analysis, and my thanks to you, Christopher Conover. And thank you so much for joining us. For all of us at Arizona Public Media, I'm Lorraine Rivera.